Hi, so in this video series, we are going to learn how to build a serverless note application. So the focus is not the serverless note application. What we are going to learn is very crucial in AWS or in cloud computing as a whole. We are going to be working with services like API Gateway, Lambda functions, AWS Cognito, and DynamoDB table. So in simple terms, what we are going to build is we are going to learn how to create a REST API and then connect that to a Lambda function. Then we'll proceed to authenticate that connection using Cognito. Then at the end, we'll proceed to add a DynamoDB table to build a complete note application like this. So what you are going to learn through it is how to set up all these things that I've mentioned. And then most of or majority of the SaaS solutions you see, the applications you see, work on this very principle and the things we are going to implement here. So kindly do all to join this journey. Feel free to drop any questions, comments, and then if you are yet to subscribe, kindly do all to subscribe to the channel. As I said, on Tech with Kabena, we try our possible best to learn AWS using one tutorial at a time. I do my best to explain everything, and if you have any questions, I'll definitely respond to you. Kindly feel free to reach out anytime. Thank you so much. Let's get right into it. Yeah, so in this part of this complete project, what we are going to do is to work on our Lambda plus API Gateway integration. So at the end of this part, you are going to know how to integrate your Lambda function with a REST API, and then you'll be able to get something like this. So if you make a GET request, you're able to get your response. This is being powered by a backend, and then if you create your dummy post request, you'll be able to get your response. Let's get right into it. The first thing we are going to work on is to build a fully working REST API with AWS Lambda serving as our backend, and then we are going to integrate it with an API gateway. So I'm going to start by first creating our Lambda function. This is going to be the name of my Lambda function. The runtime is pretty much the programming language, the engine upon which your Lambda code works. A Lambda function, simply put, is a service that allows you to run your code without provisioning or managing service. So you write your function, you upload it, and then AWS handles everything from there. So I'm going to leave this, and then for now I'm simply going to create my function. We'll adjust the permissions as we proceed. So now this is my Lambda function, and this is the dummy code you get when you create a Lambda function. So if you have a Lambda function, as I always say, the key thing you always see in your Lambda function is your Lambda handler. That is pretty much the main function or method that gets invoked anytime your Lambda function is called. So I have a simple Lambda code that we are going to use for this test. Then I'll proceed to explain what the code does. So let me expand this. So this is our Lambda code. And then in our code, the first thing we are doing is I'm importing JSON, right? So this is an inbuilt Python library that kind of brings you JSON. So it's a JSON library. We use it to pass incoming requests, right? So that we're able to get to the body and serialize our responses and all that. The next thing you see in the code is we are importing datetime, right? That is from datetime, we are importing our datetime. This allows us to get the right time zones and then get our date and time in proper timestamps. So that's the ISO format. Now the next thing you see in here is our Lambda handler. So our Lambda handler is the entry point of our Lambda function. You see, so each time you invoke your Lambda function, what happens is AWS calls this exact function first, and then this Lambda handler mostly contains an event. So an event pretty much contains everything about the incoming request, right? The HTTP request that is coming to your Lambda function is contained in the event. And then our Lambda function also has something called a context. The context is pretty much the Lambda runtime information. How is the Lambda configured and all those necessary details. So inside the code, the first thing is I'm printing the event that comes in, and then on the next thing I'm just as part of the event, I'm getting the HTTP method, right? I'm getting the method that is coming in, and then we proceed to check certain conditions that if the method coming in is a get method, I want to show this. If it's a post method, I want to show this. Then I'll proceed to print out certain messages, and then I'm kind of handling calls as part of our code. So this is pretty much it. What the course does is it allows your external website and then HTML files and things from your browser to integrate with your APIs and then your backend. So that's this in the grand scheme of things. So what I'm going to do now is to publish or deploy my Lambda function. So if you want to get this interface, just click on this button and then it will expand it for you. Now the next thing I'm going to do is to test my Lambda function. So to test, I can simply create a test event, or I can click on this test tab and I click on create new test event. So I'm going to just test my get request. I'll leave everything as default, and then with the body, this is what's going to be my body. So what I'm seeing is this is the events. Remember in our Lambda code, I mentioned that each Lambda function, anytime you're invoking it, you come in with an event. So after deploying the Lambda and then I want to test it, so I'm just bringing this thing in, and then I will test. Just save. Click on invoke. So clearly this is my response. So it succeeded. Status code was 200, and this is it. Allow method, and then look at my response. Hello from your serverless API. The method was what gets, which is part of my event, and then this is it. So this is the first part of the whole bit, right? Now we have our Lambda function working, and then we're able to test our Lambda function. Now, some of the key things I want you to note, always working with your Lambda function, is each time you make an update to your Lambda function, or if you make any modification, always remember to deploy your Lambda code. Now, the next part of this tutorial is we are going to proceed to create our REST API. So what I'll do is I'll simply search for API Gateway. So now API Gateway is an AWS service which is fully managed, and then it allows you to create secured APIs, right? It integrates perfectly with our Lambda function and other services. So we are simply going to create that. For this tutorial, we are basically going to create a REST API. So there are different forms of API. We have HTTP, which is more like a low latency and cost-free REST APIs. And then we have the normal REST, we have WebSockets, and then we have REST API for private. That's if you want your API to be a private network that is only accessible under your own VPCs and all that, you can do that. For this tutorial, we are going with REST API. So the difference between the REST API and the HTTP API is with REST API supports a bit of an advanced feature, right? You're able to do some usage plans, add API keys, integrate it with Cognito, which we'll be doing later parts of this series in part 2, and then you're able to do a lot of things. One thing is that HTTP APIs are a bit cheaper as compared to the REST API. But for this tutorial, don't worry so much about the cost. It won't cost you anything or nothing much. Alright, so you're pretty much going to build a REST API. So if I wanted to clone an existing API or import one, I can easily do that. But for this one, I'm just going to create my own API. So I'll give my API name Serverless Portfolio API. Then the endpoint, I'll leave it as original. Then for this, I'm just going to leave it as IPv4. This should be fine for now. So the first thing I'm going to create is a resource, right? I'm going to create a resource. So a resource is pretty much just a logical identity for a specific function that you can probably use, more like a grouping. It helps you organize stuff. So the first thing The first resource for this is going to be, I'm going to call my resource hello. Click on create resource. Now under the resource, I'm going to create a method. So the first method I'm going to create is going to be a get method. So what I'll do is I'll click on my hello. Please pay attention to this resource, and then I'll click on create method. Then the method type for this is going to be a get method, as we tested with a lambda function. And for the integration type is going to be a lambda function. Then I'm going to enable lambda proxy integration. So what lambda proxy integration does is this allows your API gateway to pass the full HTTP request to your lambda function as a single object, right? So it's kind of structured events that comes into the lambda function, and you're able to work with that in your lambda code. You can toggle it off and then handle your own stuff, but this tutorial I'm simply going to pass it the way we want it to be. Then I'll select my lambda function and then leave everything as it is for now, and then create method. So now our first method is ready. That's the get method. I'm now going to create another one for our post. The same approach. Now select post, integration type. The same. And then I have the same lambda function. So a lambda logic pretty much handled both. As I was going through it, if you remember, we have our get, we check the method, and then we are checking for post also. So our API will work fine. Leave everything as default, then I'll create it. Since we'll be connecting this with a web application, what I'm going to do is to enable CORS, right? As I said, CORS allows us backend or application to kind of work on the web. So I'll select my hello and then click on enable CORS. Set these two defaults, then I allow these two methods and then save it. So this kind of enable CORS for my whole lambda function. Sorry, for my API gateway. Now, as we did in lambda, each time we make changes to a lambda function, we deploy it similarly to API gateway. To deploy your API gateway, you pretty much click on deploy, and whilst deploying, you create something called a stage. So the stage is pretty much like an environment, right, that you can point to or different forms. So for this stage, for this my new stage, I'm going to call it dev. Then I'll click deploy. So there we have it. So this is our API URL, which points to our backend. Since I've integrated this with, say, our lambda function, and the lambda is doing a get operation, if I bring this, if I try accessing this in the browser, let's see what happens before we test our API gateway. Now this is part of the test. I'll simply come in here. So this is my API URL. Then I'll access my resource, and as you can see, hello from our serverless API method gets blah blah blah. So this is the message coming in from our lambda function. So our API gateway gets method is working fine. So this is how you basically integrate your lambda function with your REST APIs. So if you want to do other or further stuff, or if you have different resource groupings that you want to do, you can proceed to create them, and then you add all the necessary things that you are supposed to do. So this is how simply you do this. Now let's quickly test it in a Postman or something of a sort. Yeah, so if you have Postman, you can use Postman. If you don't have Postman and then you're on VS Code, I came across this called Tender Client. That pretty much should be able to work fine also. So this kind of allows you to test your API request. So I'm just going to just come in here, paste my base URL, and then I'll test it to see if everything is working fine. hello. So this is the response. Now to test my post method in the same client, so I'll just come in. You can use Postman if you want. Just for this tutorial, I'm just using this VS Code extension, and then I'll send my request, and then this is the response: post received, blah blah blah, and then that is part of our Lambda code, right? He said if the method is gets, it should go through the body, get some data, receive data, and then it should kind of return all these things. So that's pretty much or the exact thing what we are getting. This is the data I sent in. So this is it working. Just for those of us who want to have a simple interface tied to this, I have a very simple web interface that you can work with. If you want to have this extension, if you know you don't want to work with Postman and you want to have this extension, just open your VS Code and then come to extension, then search for Thunder Client. Yeah, I think it's this one. Just install it and then you'll be able to test your API gateway. So this is it. Now the last bit is just to show you guys just a simple web application that we have. I'll do also leave the code in the GitHub repo, just as we do. You can use that tool to test your application. So in my VS Code, I have this dummy web application. It's just an API test tool. It's just generated by AI. You can generate one yourself. So in here, I'm just doing some styling, CSS stuff, and then I'm proceeding to pass in my API gateway and then you see it. So this is pretty much it. Let me just show you guys. Oops, sorry. So I have live server on my local, so I can. So this is it. So if I want to test my URL, I can simply paste it in here. Yeah, I'll give you access to this also if you want to make use of it. Let me copy my base URL. And then I'll paste it in here, / my hello. And then if I send a request, I should get my response. Okay. So if you want to test using this tool, you can also make use of this tool to test. I'll do what to leave the code in the GitHub repo and then on our web page that has our tutorials. Now, in the next or subsequent chapters, we are going to talk about how to integrate this with Cognito for authentication and further stuff. So do all to check that out if you're interested. Yeah, so in this part, what we are going to do is we are going to add an authentication layer to our Lambda function and API gateway integration. We have already created our Lambda function and API gateways, and then in this part, what we are going to do is to add authentication towards using AWS Cognito. If you are new, you can either stick around and then walk through this. All the code and everything readily available. You can understand it and then follow along. Or if you want to get a deeper understanding, you can start from the part 1 of the series and then we should be good to go. Thank you so much for watching and then let's continue. We are going to learn how to integrate AWS Cognito, right? We are going to learn how to use AWS Cognito to kind of add an authentication layer to our API gateway to Lambda integration. So AWS Cognito is a fully managed service that allows you to manage your user authentication. You see, so think of it as a complete login system. You don't have to build yourself. Cognito in itself handles your user accounts, password hashing, email verifications, and JWT token generations and all that. So AWS Cognito allows you to do all those fancy authentication stuff without necessarily putting so much work. Now, with our Lambda and then API gateway integration, if you are new here, this is part of a series that we are working on where we are integrating the Lambda functions with API gateway and then we are trying to add authentication to it. If you are new here and then you just want to see how to do the AWS Cognito stuff, you can still stay behind. And then if you want to start afresh too from the video, you can look at the part 1 and then you'll be good to follow suit. Or you can just stick around and then we can take it out from here. So now I'll go pretty much search for Amazon Cognito. And then once you search for Cognito, you come to this page. The first thing I'm going to do is to create a user pool. So a user pool is pretty much a directory, right? That kind of contains your user data, right? From your username to the email, their password, and how to manage it, their sign up flow, and then all that. So there are two ways. One, we can simply use the traditional or just React based off what you are building. For this demo, I'm just going to select a single page web application, and then I'll give my application a name. So I'm going to call my this, and then for the options for sign in, I'm just going to select email. I'll enable self-registration, that is allow people to sign up to my system. And then for sign up, one of the required attributes that I'm going to look at is going to be the email. So I'll create the user directory. And now once this is ready, just scroll down and then I'll come to go to overview. Yeah, so on this page, please first note your user pool ID. We'll come back to it. What I'll do next is to go to my app client, and then in the app client, I'm going to enable a couple of things. I'll click on edits, and then I will enable sign in with username and password, so that my users can sign in with their username and passwords. And then I will ensure I have this allow refresh token Auth being enabled. User can sign in optionally using password and response to custom challenge. So just these two should be fine for now. I'll click on save changes. So now my app client is ready. Just for a quick test, what I can do is to just test to see if someone can log in into my account. So I'm quickly going to add a user. So I'll just create a user using my email. Just use a user using my email, mark as verified. And then I'll have this password. Create my user. So now using this user email, what I can do is when I come back to my app client, I'm just going to try and test and show you guys how authentication works with this. Yes, I can come to login pages. By default, I can just test it out to see if everything is fine. So click on view login page, and then in here I can put my email and then enter my password. And then I'm required to set a new password. So you see, I've been able to log in and sign in successfully. So this is the Cognito bit of it. That's how you can easily add users, have your login flow, and then if you want to integrate it to your application, you can pretty much follow the same steps, or you can do this. So this is the first part of our API and then Lambda integration. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is now go to my Lambda function. So I'll just simply search for Lambda. For those of us who watched the first part of the series, we created a very simple Lambda function where we had a serverless API handler, which was kind of showing the Lambda and the API Gateway integration. Yes, if you are new here, you can either check the first one out, or if you want to stay and then catch up, you can do that later. So in this code, we're pretty much just having a simple Lambda that takes in an API request, and then we just, if it's a get, we just give them a response. If it's a post, we just display the message that they entered. That's pretty much it. Now I'm going to quickly update this Lambda function So if you are new and then you are doing this, and then after setting up your Lambda function, what you are doing is you are setting up a Lambda function, integrating it with API Gateway, and then you can just do it. So you can create a new Lambda function, you go to API Gateway, you do the integration, then you are fine. So now, in the updated Lambda function, it's pretty much the same as the first one. The new stuff you see is I'm added a bit of some extraction stuff here. So what I'm doing is, because we are authenticating, now we don't want people to just hit our APIs directly. We want them to be authenticated first before they do whatever they want to do. Once they do that and they authenticate, we are getting our regular method stuff, and then now we are getting our request context, which will be part of the event that comes in, and then we are getting our email, our authorizers, and then the sub. User sub in Cognito is this. It's pretty much the unique identifier that identifies a user in Cognito, right? Most of the time, certain systems uses email. The issue with email is people email can change with time, an organization, but your sub doesn't change. So in subsequent, or in the next video, or that's the last video of the series, we will talk about how you are going to make use of the sub as an identifier in the DynamoDB table implementation. But for now, this is the updated Lambda function. So what I'm going to do is to deploy the Lambda. The same thing, nothing fancy in our Lambda. All we're doing is just getting the details and checking the method. If it's a get operation or it's a post operation, and then we just display what we are displaying. And then this is it. Now let's quickly go to API Gateway. So in API Gateway, as part of our first class, we created our sample API, which was a REST API, a very simple one that had a hello resource where we did our Lambda integration. So if you can see, there is these integrations here with our Lambda integrations for both our post and this. Now what I'm going to do is to add an authorizer to this. So before you're able to do this, you have to be authenticated first. Before you're able to do your get or your post, you should be authenticated first. So now if I come in here, say if I come to my stages and then I get my API Gateway, oh, I've deployed the Lambda function, sorry, so I should still get missing authentication. That's fine. Yeah, we'd have seen the initial get results. If you look at the part one, you see that results in there. Now in my authorizer, what I'm going to do is to create an authorizer. Let me just delete this one. This is an old one. So I'm going to create an authorizer and then call my authorizer Cognito authorizer, and then the integration type is going to be, sorry, the authorizer type is going to be Cognito. Then I'll select my Cognito user pool. Then with token source, the token source is going to be a header called authorization. So enter authorization here. Then I'll create my authorizer. So this is how simply you create your authorizer. And then after creating your authorizer, what you can do is to come to my resources and then associate these authorizers with my various methods. So I'll come to my get, and then I will come to method request, edit, and then I can add my Cognito authorizer to this. And then leave everything else as it is and click on save. I'll do same for my post request. Oh, so edit now. So for you to be able to make a request using this stuff, you have to have the various authentication tokens and all. So this is the first part of, or this is the second part of what you are going to do. We've created our authorizer and then associated it with our existing method. As I always say, anytime you make a change to your API Gateway, don't forget to deploy it. So I'll select my dev stage and then deploy it. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is to create another Lambda function So I'll come to Lambda and then create a new Lambda function. This is going to be a separate Lambda function that will handle all the Cognito operations. So if someone wants to sign up, if someone wants to confirm their email, the person wants to log in and all that, I just want to handle some of those flow from my end. So what I'm going to do is to create a Lambda function, and then I'll call it Cognito Auth Handler. The runtime is going to be Python 3.14. Then I'll proceed to create my function. Yeah, so this is my dummy Lambda that gets generated. So I have this Lambda code, which I'll make available to you guys. So now the key part of this code, one of the things is we need to change the user pool ID and the client's ID. Just a quick walkthrough in our code, similar to the first one. We are getting the events, we are getting our method, the path, and then in here we are checking if it's sign up, if the person is confirming, if the person is logging in, and then based off that we are calling the individual methods, right? So if it's a login, we are calling this method. If it's confirmation, we are doing this. If the person is just logging into, we are calling this. So that's pretty much all that the Lambda is doing. Nothing fancy. Now, to use my Lambda, I have to get my user pool ID. So what I'll do is, first, let me come to my Cognito. So in Cognito, when you come to your user pool page overview, you should get your user pool ID. I'll copy it and then come to my Lambda and then replace this. So one thing you can do is for production environments and all, you can make use of environment variables. If you are new to Lambda functions too, you can check out a simple overview video I did on Lambda functions and then you can make use of it. So I'll copy my client ID from the application clients page and then I'll come in here, then replace this. Then I'll deploy my Lambda function. Always don't forget to deploy your Lambda code. Now, so our Lambda function is ready. What I'm going to do next is to go back to API Gateway and then add some resource and methods to handle our authentication flow. So the first thing I'm going to do is, on my root, I'm going to create a new resource and then name the resource Auth. And then under Auth, I'm going to add a sub resource. The first sub resource is going to be, not a method, a sub resource for sign up. So that is if someone comes to /auth/sign up, the person should do this. I want to enable course for this. So I'll create this. And then for my sign up, I'm going to add a method. The method is going to be a post method. Since when someone is signing up, the person is going to put in their email. And then the Lambda function is going to be the integration type. And then I'll enable Lambda Protocol integration. So as I explained earlier, Lambda Protocol integration pretty much talks about the way you pass your HTTP request, right? The events, how it goes into Lambda function. So I'll just select my Cognito Auth Lambda, then I'll create my method. Now, under the Auth, I'm going to add a new resource to another resource for confirm. Then I'll do what to enable calls for these two. Just like we did for the sign up, I'm going to proceed to add a post method for the confirmation too. since you'll be sending in an event. Enable my Lambda proxy integration. Then select the same handler. As you can see in the same Lambda code, what we are doing is we are handling base of the path or what comes in. So slash my auth slash another post, and then the last one is going to be our login. So again, on the auth, I'll create a resource for login. Then I'll create this. I'll add a method. It will be a post method. Enable proxy integration. The same Lambda Cognito Auth Lambda handler, taking or making use of that. Okay, I didn't add course to this, so I'm just going to simply enable course. So course pretty much as a way that allows your browser to run scripts and then they change stuff with your APIs and backend. Just to avoid those errors, let me do this. So now I've created my API, my resource method and all. So if you are new and then you are watching this video, if you want to see how we do this, you did this. It's the same way. You just create your resources and then you are good to go. I'm going to deploy my API to my dev stage. And then now we are going to proceed to build a simple UI to test our integration. So I have a simple UI code on my local that I'm going to share with you guys. So yeah, so this is the code. So this is just a simple HTML code that displays a static UI that I worked on or built. So this is it. It's just showing you how the flow it's going to be, the authentication URL. So based on your implementation, you can add it or generate a fancy web application. However you want it, you can just generate it with an AI. Then you are good to go. So for now, I'm just going to try and call the get endpoint without authentication, and then we'll see what will happen. So I'll come to my API gateway and then copy my base URL, right? The invoke URL. If you want to get it, come to stages and then select your stage. Then I will add it to my web application. So before the authentication, let me just add this and do my /hello, then send it. So log in first to get the token. So before I'm able to do this, they require me to get the token. So let me come in here, paste my base URL, and then try logging in with the credentials I used earlier, right? To see what happens. So if I remember my password, hopefully I have it correct. Good. So now I'm logged in. Now my application shows that I've been logged in. So if I call my get request, I'll get a response from our Lambda function. So authenticated user, this is my email, and then this is it. So now if I want to make a post request, I can simply come in and then have some, say, name, then call myself. Yeah. Corbina. Then send a request. So this is it. So you see, so now I've been able to log in and then I get my token, the ID and everything. So this is how you can simply authenticate your API gateway to your Lambda function by using Cognito. Very simple. You set this up, you set up your authorizers, and then you make good use of this. Those of us that are part of the series, in the next we are going to do a bit of integration using DynamoDB table too, and then we wrap it up. Kindly don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and then be part of the family. And then let's meet in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Now, we are going to talk about how to integrate a DynamoDB application to our system to complete our ongoing project, right? So, what we are going to do is to start by creating a DynamoDB table. So I'll just simply search for DynamoDB. So if you are new to AWS, a DynamoDB table is pretty much a NoSQL database that is fully managed by AWS. So you just come in to create your tables and then you make use of it. So I'm going to create a table and then I'll call my table serverless notes. So what you're going to do is this table is going to proceed to store our notes, and then that will be tied to a specific user, right? So before the user sees their notes in the system, they'll have to go through the authentication process. They have to log in and all. So if you are new to this tutorial and then you just want to see this part of where you compare DynamoDB tables against Lambda, this is fine. But for those of us that are watching this as part of the series, this is the next step that we are going to build. That is the last part of the series where we are adding our nodes to our DB table. So yeah, I'm going to call my partition key user ID and then my sort key as note ID. So partition key and sort key, pretty much think of it like this. So you see your user key, your user ID as say a folder, and then your note ID as a file inside it. So DynamoDB uses the folder to find the right physical location first, and then by using your file, that's the file name, you're able to get the exact record. Right. So partition key is kind of helping us to do the grouping, and then sort key to identify that particular object. Pretty much like that. So I'm just going to select this, customize, leave it as on demand, and then just create my table. This should be fine. Good. The next thing is we are going to modify our Lambda function. That's the serverless API Lambda function we've been working with. What we are going to do is to modify the Lambda function logic so that it's able to write into a DB table. So the new update I'm doing with today's Lambda is so this Lambda function is pretty much a very simple code where we are kinda performing some CRUD stuff on the Lambda function. So we are going to update, add nodes, do all that. So if you go through it, the Lambda function is doing pretty much that. The key components are just the initial bits, that's where we are doing the authentication using our Cognito, and then the following are the various paths, right, that we are going to configure surely in API Gateway, and then the rest are the various methods that we're working with. Say create nodes, get all nodes, and then if need to update the nodes. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. The rest is just we handling core stuff. So I'm just going to deploy this Lambda for now. If you are watching this video afresh, this is just a Lambda function that is kind of being fronted by an API gateway that gets invoked. We've been using this thing as part of our tutorial series. Yeah, so if you want to check it out, do feel free to look at the initial bit of the project, and then that will be good to go. Now the next thing is to go to API Gateway to add our new node resources, right? So inside API Gateway, we have a simple API that we've been working with, and then we currently have Auth, a resource for Auth, that's for authentication, and then the initial hello stuff we were using for first in the part one. This came in part two. So now I'm just going to add a new resource for the nodes. The same way we've been doing it all this while. Just come in, I'll create my resource, and then now under my node resource, I'm going to create a method that's for post. That is when you want to create, right? Again, I'm going to enable my Lambda proxy integration, and for this, I'm going to select my serverless API handler, the Lambda function we updated. Yes, one last thing. For our method request, we are going to select our Cognito authorizer that we initially worked on. So I'm going to create that method. Then I will then proceed to let me enable course for this method. I think I didn't do that. Sorry for this resource. Let me enable course. Then I'm going to proceed to add a new method for get. So to get all our notes from the DB table we created, again pointing the same serverless handler, I'll select the same Cognito authorizer, then I'll create it. Now I'm going to create another resource under the notes to be able to get a specific note detail. So I'm just going to click on my notes and then click on create resources. Then I'll paste this thing in there. And I'll create it. Now under this slash notes, what I'm going to do is to add my various methods. So this allows me to perform certain actions on the individual nodes, right, from the DB table. That's why I have that curly bracket around that. So I'm able to pass certain details as a parameter through it. Now, kindly don't forget your authorizer or authorization. The next one is put to update it to enable Lambda proxy integration. The same backend. Then now the last one is going to be able to delete it. So let me add a delete method. Enable, select this, again same authorizer from authorization, then create. And ensure I enable course. Yeah, so this is pretty much it. What I'm going to do now is to deploy my API gateway. So as part of the video, I've been mentioning always that once you make any changes to API gateway, if you want to see it, you have to deploy it. So now API is ready. So what I can proceed to do is to access my web application, and then this is it. So we have this, that's our serverless code. I'll do well to share this with you. Don't worry so much about this. This is heavily AI generated. You can play with it and then generate your own web application to work with. But this is what we currently have. So we have just a simple note app that requires us to authenticate first, then you'll be able to see our available notes, right? So I'll just go in here to copy my base URL as always, just to get myself authenticated. So this is it. Then for my note API, I'm going /notes. Yeah, so in an actual application, some of these things will all be in the actual code itself. You won't see them on the UI, just for our testing purposes. That's why I have this thing here. So let me simply log in. So yeah, I've logged in successfully, and then as you can see, if I want to enter notes, this is testing. Hello world. Let me save my notes. Error. Assume row. Oh, this is a good one to catch. So our Lambda permission doesn't have the necessary policy to do a partition item into a DB table. So let me quickly fix that. So now to my serverless Lambda function, I'll basically come to configuration. One, let me just increase my timeouts to avoid all timeout issues to a minute. And then to fix the permission issue, I'll simply come to permissions, then open the row. So what I'm going to do is to create a simple inline policy. So I'll create an inline policy. The service that I'm looking at is DynamoDB, so I'll search for DynamoDB. Then the first error I'm getting is a put item. I think because I want to list it, I'm sure we will need a get item also. Then I'm very sure to update an item in a DB table, we need an update item, an update table. Then probably to be able to delete, I will need delete items. So yeah, so with the permissions and stuff, the more you work with, the more you play with AWS, you realize that you have all these things in here. So now let me add query to it. And then for resources, for this, I'm not going to specify the direct ARN, I'm just going to select all. Click on next. Then give my policy a name. Let me do serverless. Yeah, I can just give it any name you want. Then create my policy. So this is an inline policy. So hopefully, if I come to my UI again, then I try saving notes, this should work. So yeah, so as you can see, now our note has been added to our DynamoDB table. If I come to DynamoDB and then I refresh, explore items, you'll see our table item in here, right? For this user, you'll see it in here. So hello world, blah blah blah, it just comes in there, and then that is it. So this is just a simple test, right? So you can just keep on playing with this and then see how some of these things go. So you can just play with this, generate some fancy applications and do whatever you want to do. So this is how pretty much you build a serverless notes app, right? But the focus is not the serverless notes app. The focus is the things we learned along the journey. Now you know how to create an API gateway, a REST API. You know how to create Lambda functions, integrate your API with your Lambda function, proceed to add authentication to it through Cognito, and then you can then proceed to integrate with it a database like DynamoDB table and all. So now users are only able to access your notes, your applications through authentication. A lot of the apps you see around works pretty much on these various principles that you've seen. Thank you so much for watching, and then see you in the next project tutorial.